Okay, so you know that feeling, that like nagging sense of discontent, like something's missing, even when you have like everything you think you're supposed to have, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Today we're diving deep into that feeling with Jiddu Krishnamurti.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he is a philosopher who spent his whole life really trying to understand like the inner workings of the human mind.
Mm-hmm.
And you sent over some of his writings on like discontent and this whole idea of always wanting more.
Right.
And I gotta say, some of his stuff is like surprisingly relevant to, our world today.
Yeah, Krishnamurti is fascinating because he doesn't really offer these like quick fixes or easy answers, He
Yeah.
really makes you look at how your own minds is kind of like perpetuating this cycle of always wanting more, always striving.
Yeah, totally. It's like he's holding up a mirror and saying, look, this is how you're, creating your own suffering in a way.
Right.
But he also says you have the power to choose something different.
Yeah, I like that.
And he uses this really cool analogy of a sailboat to kind of explain this whole thing.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does that work?
So picture this. You've got a sailboat, right?
Okay.
And it's gliding across the water, effortless, like sails full of wind, just, smooth sailing.
Yeah,
And he says that's like the human spirit in its purest form.
I like that.
Yeah, like full of potential, just ready for anything.
Yeah.
And then
And then
we start piling on the cargo.
Oh, I see it.
All that stuff, the desires, the expectations, the anxieties, the shoulds, the must-haves.
Oh, all that baggage.
All that baggage,
Yeah.
the pressure to achieve, get more stuff, chase validation from other people.
Right.
And little by little, that sailboat, it starts to sink lower and lower in the water.
It's bogged down.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And just like that sailboat, we lose that like lightness, that joy, that freedom we probably felt when we were younger,
Yeah, for sure.
But here's the thing. Krishnamurti says it's not about like getting rid of ambition completely.
Right.
It's more about understanding like what's driving that ambition and how it can sometimes keep us trapped in this like loop of more that never really satisfies.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And he actually calls this constant pursuit, he calls it a form of theft.
Theft, that's interesting. I haven't heard that before.
It's a pretty bold statement
It is.
because he's saying when we're always comparing ourselves, trying to achieve what others have, be like them.
Mhm.
We're basically trying to like steal their essence, their thing.
Your spark.
Yeah, and in doing that, we kind of miss out on finding our own.
Wow. That's powerful. And it's like he's saying this theft isn't just about like material stuff or status.
Right.
He's saying it even seeps into how we approach, relationships, even knowledge, like even trying to become more enlightened or whatever.
It's like even those things that we think of as quote unquote positive can become kind of a trap.
Right.
If they're coming from this place of like, I'm not enough as I am.
Exactly. And I think that's where his teachings get really like challenging for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because he's asking us to look beyond the surface level of what we want
Mm-hmm.
and really examine like what's the deeper motivation here? Why are we doing the things we're doing?
Yeah, that's a great point. So if we're always kind of stuck in this theft mode, always chasing after more, how do we actually break free? Because, Krishnamurti doesn't just leave us hanging with this like kind of depressing diagnosis, does he?
No, not at all. And this is where, honestly, I think his ideas get even more interesting. He suggests that like the path to actually feeling content, truly free, it doesn't actually involve like forcing ourselves to just never have desires or ambitions.
Okay.
It's more about changing how we relate to those things. And it starts, he says, with observation.
Okay, so what does he mean by that? Observation. It's not just like zoning out and watching our thoughts go by, right?
No, not exactly. It's not like a purely detached, intellectual exercise. It's really more about like cultivating this kind of mindful awareness of what's happening in our minds. So like noticing the thoughts, the feelings, the impulses that come up, but without judging them or feeling like we need to change them.
So it's almost like hitting the pause button on that voice in our head that's constantly like, do this, get that, you got to be more like this person, and instead just being present with what is right now.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that Krishnamurti says when we can actually create that space, that stillness within ourselves, something kind of amazing happens.
This is where the sailboat comes back in, right?
It is. So picture it again, our sailboat. But now imagine that we start to gently like remove some of that cargo. That weight of comparing ourselves to everyone else, that fear of not being good enough, that constant striving. what happens to the boat?
It starts to rise up. It's lighter, freer.
Yes, exactly. And that's what he's saying happens to us, to our spirit, when we can learn to observe our minds without getting totally swept away by every single thought and desire that pops up.
But that idea of just being still, observing, it sounds so simple when you put it like that.
Yeah.
But in practice, I don't know, it feels a lot harder than it sounds.
Oh, it definitely takes practice, yeah. And this is actually where I think his emphasis on compassion comes in. He really believed that, learning to be truly compassionate towards ourselves and others, it's like a crucial part of breaking free from that cycle of always feeling discontent.
Because if we're constantly judging ourselves, comparing ourselves, finding ourselves lacking,
Yeah.
it's going to be pretty hard to be truly compassionate to, well, anyone.
Right, exactly. And it goes both ways, actually. Just like all that self-criticism can kind of block compassion, Making the effort to be more compassionate can actually help quiet that inner critic, which then creates more space for that stillness and clarity to emerge.
So how does Krishnamurti even define compassion? Because he has a very specific way of talking about it.
Yeah, he really does. He makes this distinction between what he calls like sentimental compassion
Okay.
and then like true compassion. And he says that sentimental compassion, it's often coming from a place of pity or even a sense of superiority.
Like, oh, you poor thing.
Yeah, exactly. Or even just like, well, at least I'm not like that. It's still coming from a place of separation.
Right.
Whereas true compassion, he says, it comes from a really deep understanding that we are all connected, that everyone's sharing this human experience with all the good and the bad that comes with it.
Yeah. And this is where he talks about the example of a parent losing a child.
Yeah, really powerful example.
An experience that I think most of us can barely even imagine. He acknowledges how deeply personal that kind of grief is. But then he also asks us to think about, the universality of loss, like how it connects us all on some level.
Right. And he's saying that it's in like moving beyond just the personal nature of suffering, not denying it, but seeing it as part of this larger human experience. That's where we can start to open ourselves up to this more profound, more expansive kind of compassion.
It's like we're shifting from that, like, woe is me, to I see you, I feel you.
Exactly. And that, even though it might be rooted in something painful, that shared understanding, I think, can be really healing.
Totally.
It's like this recognition of our shared humanity.
Yeah.
And I think Krishnamurti would say it's in those moments of really genuine connection that we start to kind of loosen the grip of that self-centered discontent that keeps us feeling so isolated and incomplete.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've gone from this image of a sailboat, like bogged down by all this cargo, to this like much wider view of compassion that connects us all. But how do we actually like cultivate that deep sense of compassion in our everyday lives? Especially when, let's face it, we are bombarded with messages that seem designed to make us compare ourselves and feel insecure.
It's a great question.
Right.
And I think, again, Krishnamurti would probably say that it starts with just like becoming aware of those messages, those societal scripts that tell us we're always going to be happier if we just get a little bit more, do a little bit more, a little bit more.
Right. So it's about noticing like how those messages actually make us feel.
Exactly.
That like tightness in your chest,
Totally.
That impulse to like immediately check your phone, or that little voice saying, not good enough.
All of that.
Yeah.
And, instead of just immediately reacting to those feelings, those thoughts, we can choose to just pause for a second.
Yeah.
Create a little bit of space between like the thing and our reaction to the thing.
Like we get to decide how we respond instead of just being like totally controlled by these automatic patterns.
Yes, 100%.
And powerful.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's where that practice of observation comes back in.
Right.
Because the more we observe those patterns, those habits in our minds, the more we start to see them for what they really are. Just thoughts, not necessarily the truth.
It's like that saying, don't believe everything you think.
Exactly.
And when we can do that, when we can create that space of awareness, we can actually make a different choice.
Right.
Like choose a different way of being in the world.
And I think that's really what he's getting at, True freedom, it's not about achieving this perfect state of being.
Right.
It's about realizing we have that power in each moment to choose awareness over just going on autopilot.
Yeah.
To choose compassion over criticism.
And to choose, like you were saying, to kind of sail through life a little lighter, a little more connected to ourselves and like the world around us.
Beautifully said.
This whole deep dive into Krishnamurti's work has been, I don't know, just really insightful,
It has.
challenging for sure.
Yeah,
But I think ultimately really hopeful
absolutely.
because it reminds us that we're not like prisoners of our own minds.
Right.
Change is possible.
It is.
And that contentment that we're looking for might be a lot closer than we think.
And it all starts with that willingness to look inward,
Yeah.
to observe without judging,
Mm-hmm.
and to just choose compassion, for ourselves and everyone around us.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this. If you could release just one thing
Yeah.
from that sailboat today.
Oh, I like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One fear, one comparison, one expectation that you're holding on to,
Mhm.
what would it be?
Good one.
And what would become possible if you just let it go?
I love that.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.